Hey guys, it's me, EODGamer here, and we're back with another team composition video, and today we have the well-requested Clara, a very confusing character that is unlike most of the other DPSs here because her main mechanic is her counter mechanic with Survival Rock. For those of you who are new to turn-based games, there are two types of teams. Cleave teams generally revolve around heroes that one-shot the entire team. For example, you have AoE attackers as well as maybe a defense break on the enemy, together with speed up buffers to buff your whole team. In a sense, cleave teams aim to just kill off the entire enemy unit before they even take a single turn. And on the other hand, in the second option that we have is actually called a bruiser team. This team is basically like more tanky and more sustain based. So you have the likes of a tanky character like Clara, maybe you have a healer inside with Natasha, and other characters like maybe Gepard and stuff like that. This team mainly revolves around being able to soak up a lot of damage and being able to also withstand cleave teams' AoE damage break as well. I think one reason why Clara is not seeing the limelight as much is because there's not a significant PvP focus in Honkai Star Rail yet. But one thing to note is that if we do have the arrival of PvP in Honkai Star Rail, which is a good possibility, I'll talk about the PvP, why I think it might be a high chance in another video, but Clara is going to be an excellent hitch once PvP comes out, or even if there is no PvP, she's going to be a very good counter against enemy units that move very fast or are AoE focused in nature. I do think she's one of the strongest characters in the game as mentioned in the tier list videos, but I'll talk a bit about why as we go on this video. But first, let's dive into the free-to-play team comp, shall we? The free-to-play team comp section is going to be totally with the base units only. And let's say you pulled Clara and you got lucky pulling Clara, you want to know like what free-to-play comps work really well with her. I think the best character in terms of the free-to-play unit to work very well with Clara will be a unit like Natasha. A lot of people are saying March 7 might be actually better because of drawing the aggro to Clara and then both of them get to counter. I don't think this is the case. I don't think March 7 is going to be as useful as a character to sustain, because if you think about it, Clara already has damage reduction in her kit, 40% with her ultimate, as well as already has very high increased aggro drawing. Putting another character like March 7 offers nothing much else, as you direct more aggro to her, but she already has drawing aggro and she already has damage reduction in her kit with her very high amount of HP stat line as well. So I don't think March 7 is going to be really useful. You use two characters to more or less play around the same path. Don't really like it. I think March 7 has other users, just not together with Clara. I prefer Natasha, who actually offers a team-wide healing, because Clara is a very excellent counter to AoE enemy attacks. So she doesn't even need to have aggro. As long as the enemy hits her a little bit or hits any of the allies, she will proc her ability and she's a good counter to AoE strats. Natasha also prevents the attrition damage for the other characters that get through the AoE, and it's a very solid pick for this second slot as well. In the third and fourth slot, I think it's pretty flexible in terms of what you can pick, because honestly, Clara with her 40% damage reduction, self-cleanse, and also having a resistance to crowd control abilities, very strong already. And I think at this point I want to talk about the stat line. So in this chart that you see here, I've done a database. You can check it out, hsrguide.com. I wrote every single character in terms of their stats and skills, so I know most of these characters very well, and that's why I can make these videos really fast for you guys as well. So if you see here now, we are actually sorting the top 5 characters in Honkai Star Rail by total stat value. Basically took whatever HP, attack, defense, speed stat they have and divided it by the average to get a number 1.0. If you are less than 1.0, you are below average. So as you can see here, it's sorting them from total stat value, just a summation of the 4 stat lines. We can see that Clara is actually very high up in terms of the total stat line value, being the 3rd highest in the category. And total stat line makes a lot of sense for a character like Clara because she uses all of her stats. Her offensive stats and defensive stats are both used as well. Of course, she has a very slow speed and is bringing her down in terms of value, losing out to a character like maybe Gepard with a lower defense stat and speed stat compared to him. But one thing to note is that Clara doesn't even need to bail for speed at all, because she's going to be focused on attack, and I think that it makes her a very solid character for overall stat line growth. If you guys want to see more of this chart, I can do another video talking about all of them and my thoughts on the stat breakdown as well. But for now, let's go back into the video in terms of the free-to-play comp so far. So we have Clara, we have Natasha, and I think 2 other characters that can be used in this comp. You could run, for example, a character like Asta. For example, in this slot to give a bit of speed buff to move her faster, or mainly you will actually want the attack buffer. There is going to be a better attack buffer, but for a total free-to-play comp, I think that this is going to work pretty well as well. Of course, the last option I will use is probably Danheng in the last slot already. And one thing good about Clara's team comp is Clara doesn't rely on speed and rather more of your defensive gear that you'll find. So if you are forming two teams in the Memory of Chaos, you will actually be much better off running Clara in a second team, and then maybe you have your favorite, maybe Zila or Jingyuan in the first team, who relies more on like a lot of maybe speed stat for Zila and also other offensive stat. Clara prefers a bit more attack, like you can run an attack boots instead of a speed boots, and you can run more HP and tanky gear that you get. So at least you diversify your options out rather than like having all 8 characters needing speed and attack. Then it's going to be pretty troublesome as well. So very good character to diversify your resource pool, especially early on when you don't have that much resources to build every single character. You want characters that can fulfill a lot of roles and also diversify your resource efficiency. Very solid character to have, even if it's not your main. I think a second main in as a core for your second team in Memory of Chaos will be excellent and very, very strong as well. So let's talk a bit, if we add in a little bit more gacha into the aspect, what will I change in this team comp? I think first things first, I will definitely be moving out Asta. Clara doesn't need that speed buff, more so the attack buff, and a character like Tingyun is going to be super strong for Clara. Why do I say that? Clara's mainly what she wants is to have uptime on her ultimate or burst, and Tingyun gives the energy restorations to Clara as well. So when you have a huge amount of energy restoration, she keeps her uptime on her enhanced counter with Servalrock, and also the attack buffer buffs Clara, who has the second highest attack in the game just behind Himiko. Super strong stat line, and Tingyun does boost her up significantly. I saw some videos that say, some comments in my previous videos that say that, oh, just talk about the focus and synergetic slot, ignore the rest. But this is an example of a team that you can't just focus on the first 2 characters, because these 3 characters synergize very well with each other. With Clara's high base stat line and also Tingyun's buffing, Tingyun kind of becomes like a pseudo attack buffer as well. And with the damage reduction and aggro draw for Clara, Natasha does settle a lot of other AoE damage that gets by and hits the rest of the characters. So very, very solid combination as well. The last slot here is pretty flexible. I think that there are many ways you can go about doing it. You don't want to run a speed down enemy unit generally, because if you have a speed down enemy unit, means that they won't be attacking your team as much, and Clara doesn't get to finish off her counters before her burst is up. So I do think that in terms of options for the third slot, I would generally prefer maybe a character like Susang. Of course, one thing to note is you have a triple physical in this slot, so it isn't really diversified in that aspect. But of course, early on, Danheng is not going to crit all the time, so it's pretty fine as well if speed down, and it's only a single target. So both of them I think will work pretty well as well. Danheng might be a little bit better for the diversification that he offers. And I'm adding in this clip towards the end of my filming already. I realized I missed out one very important character, and that is Ireland. I think that one of the single target units that could be replaced and might be the best in slot for a 4-star team would definitely be a character like Ireland, who does a lot of single target damage with a bit of splash damage, doesn't use skill abilities or use skill points with his skill gauges because he eats HP instead. And if he's playing generally at low life, he wants someone who draws the aggro away for him, and it works really well with Clara to do a lot of damage on the side. The only problem with Ireland generally is it's quite difficult to maintain, especially if you're playing him always at very low life. If the enemy has some sort of splash damage, perhaps you want to replace Natasha with a character like Fire MC to give more shielding, as he does like to stay at pretty low life. So in this sense, if you want to play a team comp with Ireland, you could consider running something like Fire MC, Clara, Tingyun to make a pretty good solid team to help him excel as well. Very strong single target damage dealer with a bit of splash on the side too. Okay, so now let's talk about the Whale Clara team comp, where we are done with all the 4 stars and the permutations already, and let's talk about what happens if we have an additional standard 5-star as well as perhaps a limited 5-star as well. Let's start off with perhaps the worst 5-star option that you will get in pairing with Clara, and I do think the worst pair for Clara is actually, well, I said it briefly with Danheng, and the reason why Clara is actually quite bad with Well is Clara actually capitalizes on enemies that are moving fast and doing dealing a lot of AoE damage. By stopping the enemy to move, you actually effectively reduce Clara's effectiveness because she doesn't get as much opportunities to counter when enemies don't attack as often. Of course, Welt can be really strong as well if you are of course running a more offensive or speed up Clara, but it's really counterintuitive, and that's why I don't think these two characters will work together. That doesn't mean Welt or Clara are both lousy characters. They are both really strong, and you could even put Welt in the other team in terms of Memory of Chaos. Alright, so now the next character that we have is Bailu. So in terms of Bailu's healing ability, it works very similar to Natasha, and the concept of why it's going to be very good. Since she's going to be soaking up a lot of damage, Bailu actually allows you to make some sort of mistake. For example, if the rest of your characters, they don't draw aggro towards Clara and kill maybe off your squishy other characters, she's going to be a real solid character to hedge any surprise attacks that the enemy will launch at your characters. So in terms of the pivot and gap fill slot, I do think an attack buffer will make really nicely in this slot over here to boost up Clara even more. And the last slot definitely is going to be a more of a single target damage dealing unit. And between you and me, I do think that this is going to be a secret comp that is going to be very, very strong in terms of clearing the early game for speedrunners. If I am lucky enough to get these two characters, I do foresee myself clearing the Memory of Chaos, possibly one of the fastest in the game. And the reason is because Clara has a 40% damage reduction, and Gepard has huge amounts of stat pool for a 5-star character, as well as AoE shielding. They scale off different stat line, which means it's super highly efficient and you can reach the end game quicker. And also Gepard has an inbuilt revive in his kit. Super amazing, super strong. Both of them draw aggro and it allows them to split up some damage with a bit of shielding and good damage from both sides. You run a Natasha in this slot and maybe a Tingyun in the last slot, for example, and what you get is a comp that cannot die. So when you have a comp that cannot die, other than maybe for a DPS check, can clear content that you're not supposed to because the enemies do too much damage much quicker than other players, and that will be my secret to getting a hit if I do pull these two characters. Very strong team, and let's just keep it between us. I think Bronya is not going to be very effective for Clara because Clara doesn't really care about turn order. She just wants to get her ultimate up, use her ultimate, and then be very passive in the defensive position. The attack buffing, damage buffing is definitely going to be good, but you won't generally be buffing a character like Clara most of the time. And if you are playing Bronya, probably you want to be focusing on, for example, Dunhing, to buff Dunhing up so he can get additional wind pen and additional damage as well. So this team definitely is not very weak by far, but if you're playing more of like a bruiser defensive team comp, Bronya is going to be a little bit diversifying away from a counter cleave kind of team and more into like a half cleave, half bruiser team, which it could work for PvE, but PvP, if there is eventual PvP, I don't think this is going to be really fantastic as well. And alright, let's now talk about Himiko. I think that Himiko is probably like the second worst character behind Welt for Clara, because Clara already does quite a lot of physical damage, about 320% on the initial target when she's enhanced, and with that splash damage it does like 160 per side and 320 on the main target for counters. Very good physical damage, AoE damage already, and you don't really need a character like Himiko to do additional AoE damage. But if you do want to play Himiko, maybe because you like her kit or you got lucky and you put both of these characters, I think that you will definitely want to run, for example, a more single target damage dealer, perhaps of a different element. And in this case, if you have Himiko here, I highly recommend playing, for example, Esta. But if you play like an offensive Esta to buff these two characters in terms of attack buffing, what you lack is a bit of defensive position. So perhaps you have to choose between whether you want to be more offensive or a bit more defensive with Natasha in terms of healing as well. In this sense, Tingyun might not be as useful in this team composition. Your last slot here will probably be Dunhing. So Yanting is actually going to be really, really strong with Clara because she is AoE focused, he's single target focused, and in general, I don't really like Dunhing with Clara for this composition, as speed down is relatively unsynergetic with her playstyle. But Yanting is very independent, doesn't really need much buffs in terms of his kit. That makes you dedicate Tingyun to Clara, and Clara's drawing aggro also helps with Yanting's passive, who like doesn't want to get hit, if not he loses his own self buffs. So this works really well, and if you're fighting single target enemies, you can always just let Tingyun buff Yanting, and it works really well in terms of flexibility. And in terms of the third slot, I would definitely do recommend still running a character like Natasha. I think it's really strong. Double attack buffers are not as attractive because you want a bit more sustain to get the team by harder comps as well. Alright, so now we've come to the last section, which is if you are the Prince of Saudi Arabia or you have like tons of cash to splurge on Honkai Star Rail, I think a team comp that works really well is like, for example, playing Sealy in the 4th slot here in terms of the gap fill. This will allow you to have actually quite a very strong amounts of single target damage dealer, as well as a good sustain from Natasha and attack buffers from Tingyun. Tingyun can choose whether you want to buff Zila or whether you want to buff Clara, depending on whether you want more single target or AoE damage. If you remove Natasha from the set, you could also play a character like Gappa, and that's where it gets pretty expensive. But this team is actually really very strong because you have AoE shielding to protect like squishier characters, for example Zila, as well as this team is going to be a very strong team to push content because you have strong single target damage, very good AoE damage, and Zila is relatively independent because she has her own very high base speed to begin with, and with the flexibility option of AoE damage or single target, I think this is a very strong team. Of course, it's not cheap because for most people with lesser resources, you could easily put Zila on the other side and run a similar team comp as well. But this is some things to consider. If, for example, you have even more money to spend and you don't want to put in a standard 5-star like Gappa, you can also play Luo Ca in this position to give you AoE, strip the enemy buffs in terms of his ultimate, and also giving him quite good amounts of imaginary damage to the team. His healing works in a lifesteal style, which might work really well with Clara as well, together with an emergency heal in case any of them, in case like a target attacks any of the other 3 characters rather than aggroing directly to Clara. Very strong team, but as you can see, it's a pretty expensive team to build because you are playing, for example, 3 limited 5-stars, which is by no means cheap. And in my opinion, like probably the best team, if you had if money was no object, you can spend as much as you want. So you run a double physical as well as a double quantum. What this means, you can use Silver Wolf's skill where you can implant weaknesses of either physical or quantum, and you have a very strong AoE damage, single target damage, debuffing the enemies, as well as good sustain throughout, doubling down on like the double physical element as well. And for example, even if you don't want to play Natasha, you can also go with another option. If you want more offensive ability, you could even run Su Sang here, and for example, you can swap Zila out with Fu Xuan if she comes out in the future as well. Fu Xuan is said to be a quantum preservation character, so it adds that defensive ability. If you like this video, you might like these other videos right here. Let me know in the comments what other characters you want to see as well. I've gotten some comments, and I'll do the next most popular character coming right up. Thank you so much for watching, and see you in the next video.